Agile is like more or less an umbrella term, and there are so many different methodologies underneath it. So yes, I'm passionate about the subject. I have worked in a couple of projects before, both some of them like are through my professional work experiences, some of them through my personal projects. But happy to be here. Other than that, I have got some expertise in the employment consulting area as well, where I'm working right now. So yeah, very happy to be in the session and perhaps share some insights on what I have learned in this space.
That sounds good. Thank you for the brilliant introduction. So, everyone, today we will dive into the Agile, Scrum, as well as the product development world, where we will discuss few questions and clarifications about roles and responsibilities, what exactly Agile and Scrum. So, on that note, let me start with our first question. So, Adya, would you mind explaining something about the general project management, where we are talking about Agile as well, right? So the trending word. So could you enlighten us something on the general project management versus the Agile project management?
Yes, sure. That's a very, very interesting question. And I think that should be the starting point for anybody who is interested in learning about these things, right? So, project management, it's kind of an umbrella term. And as a term signifies itself, like it's about managing projects. Now, after defining this, like we should also understand how we exactly should manage projects. And there are different types of methodologies to manage it, right? The first methodology, or one of the most popular methodologies, is the traditional or the waterfall methodologies. And the other most popular one is the agile methodology. Nowadays, like we are also kind of getting acquainted with the hybrid methodology, which is like kind of a combination in between the waterfall and the agile, and takes
Right.
from the best of both the worlds, right? Now, what is exactly traditional or waterfall methodology? It's kind of trying to execute a project through different phases in a controlled way, and the phases that mainly the waterfall methodology considers are planning the project, right, and then implementing it, executing, monitoring and controlling, as well as closing the projects. So when we are following a waterfall methodology, we have to have everything planned before. We need to know what's the scope of the project, what we are really going to work on, what are some of the requirements, right?
Mhm, mhm.
How we are going to develop it, who will be our
Right.
stakeholders in the project, what will be the communication plan for the project, right? So all
Yeah.
of the project scope needs to be planned, needs to be approved by the committee that we have, and then we should move towards slowly towards executing the project.
Right.
And
Right.
then when we are executing the project, one thing that's come into place is about monitoring and controlling the different phases. There are lots of things that that goes within these phases, like you need to manage the cost, you need to manage the resources, you need to manage the vendors that will be working in those projects, and then you need to monitor and control those things while you are actually navigating through these phases. And then once everything gets completed, then you get to show it to the client, get as well as the stakeholders get their final approvals, and close the project and move it towards a support for any
Right.
kind
Yeah.
of customer difficulties that the project might face in. So as you can see that in traditional, we are kind of planning and executing the project, but actually delivering the final deliverable at the very end, right?
Right.
But in terms of agile projects, it's more of a flexible way of doing the project, where the main focus is bringing in value to the customers as soon as you can, right?
Right.
And basically delivering the values in terms of increments, so that the customer knows what they are really getting. And in the process, like if they feel like, oh, this thing is not working right and this thing might needs to be changed, then they will basically inform the product owner or the stakeholders, and accordingly we can embrace those changes, implement them, so that the customer
Right.
focus becomes the primary concern. And
Mhm.
so that should be in a nutshell. I know, like, I'm explaining a lot, but it's very important to know about these things while you are really diving into these concepts. And then
Correct.
the
It's very
hybrid
true.
method. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the hybrid methodology is actually based off both the worlds,
Both the
where
worlds. Yeah.
yes, where we are doing the planning and for the project, but at the same time we are also implementing and executing them in different kind of phases. The agile thing or the flexibility thing can be placed in different phases of the project within a hybrid, based on what the company or the organization is really looking forward and how they're executing the projects.
That's true. So, given this one, right, when we work on the traditional methodology, it has
Mhm.
its own uniqueness or own kind of criterias to meet, as well
Yes.
as the benefits. Similarly, agile now, when we talk about agile, for according to me, it's more than the framework. It's all about the mindset.
Yes.
It changes you as a project manager and your team from within. It works on the mindset level, where it reflects on your team as well as your project, where you realize the benefits very soon. So talking on that, we have certain principles of agile methodology or the project management. So would you highlighting something on the agile principles according to your experience?
Yes, Sunil, another important question as well as concept to discuss, right? So there are 12 Agile principles based on the Agile manifesto that
Mhm.
we have and that has been developed. And the Agile manifesto basically acts as a foundation of all the things that we do under the Agile umbrella, as well as the different methodologies that we have, different frameworks that we have. So one of the most important principle for the Agile Manifesto is kind of satisfying the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software, right? So basically, in Agile, we are kind of dividing the projects into very smaller segments of work and trying to deliver them through sprints, right? So what we are trying to do through that is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery. We are not saying that we are going to deliver the software at the very end of the project, right? But we are saying that, okay, we need to develop this software, so let's go through different part by part, right? Let's first develop the APIs or the front end part of it, and let's show it to you, and let's know what you as a client think of it, and then go to the next phase and trying to incorporate those feedbacks from you, so that we can provide the utmost value based on the requirements that you have. The other important principle within the Agile Manifesto is kind of welcoming change requirements even late in the development phase. So as we know in waterfall project, it's more about having the plans and having everything ready and going phase by phase, having approvals from each phase before we move on to the next. So in kind of traditional projects, it's very what shall I say? It's very difficult to embrace the changes once we are, once we have moved through the phases, and once we have developed, a certain part of the project. We have to take different kind of approvals from the change committee and from the stakeholders that we have.
Right.
Whereas, in case of agile projects, we embrace the change, right? You as a client, you as a customer can always come to us and say that, hey, I think I need this change right now. And we, within the agile team, we will then negotiate with you to see, okay, which are some of the changes that we can implement, and which are
Okay.
some of the items that we can do later on to provide you with that most value. While there are 12 agile principles, I think these are the most important. The other thing that I feel is very important is working software being the primary measure of the progress, right? So as we are delivering different kind of different units of work through our user stories, as well as through developing different features, we want you to taste that particular feature that we have developed as a client, and we want you to provide the feedback so that the working software that we have developed through this different phases becomes a primary measure of the progress. And then, simplicity through the art of maximizing the amount of work not being done is essential for the agile principles as well. So what it means really is we should be knowing that through each of the sprints, what we are actually developing, what's the scope, what we will be developing, and also what we will not be developing. So it's very important to know that in order to keep the agile projects in progress and on track, and in
Right.
sync with the client requirements.
Correct. So we have almost 12. However, these are some of the basic and important, principles that we regularly use. However, we are not, leaving those behind. But yeah, we take all 12 principles together in order to have the brilliant team or the self-empowered team, right? Yeah, that's great. Now, moving towards something deeper into the discussions, we would you mind explaining something about the different roles that we have in agile management? Then
Uh,
slowly we'll dive into other topics, but yeah, I would like to understand what are the different roles we have in agile project management.
Yes. So mainly the three important roles that we have under the Agile umbrella is related to the product owner, who is the main owner of the product, right? Like as the name suggests, there is the Scrum Master and also the development team. Now, people often think the development team as only the developers. Well, that's kind of a misconception. The development team consists of all the people who might be associated with the development of a particular feature. It can be business analysts, it can be UX UI designers, it can be front end developers, back end developers, and so on and
So
so forth.
yeah.
Uh, there, in some of the projects, there can be technical project managers as well, who basically is a subject matter expert of the different technical things and tries to guide the functional side of the software development projects.
Right. Great. So on that note, we have little confusion about always, those who are entry level, project managers. Every time we have a confusion like Scrum Master role with the product versus the product owner role.
Yes.
So could you light on these, how these two roles are different from each other in terms of the agile world?
Yes. Again, that's a very interesting question. So the product owner role, as the name suggests, is the owner of the product. They do have an understanding of the product goal as well as a vision. They will be the primary person who will be developing the product roadmap, right? How we are going to develop the product, what are some of the features that we really need in the product in order to meet the customer vision, right, as well as the
Right.
goals. They are also the owners of the product backlog. The product backlog consists of the items or the user stories that we are considering to develop in order to provide the appropriate features for the product, right? And in terms of the Scrum Master is more of a servant leader who is actually the glue in folding the product owner, the development team, and all other things that comes within the project. They act as the servant
The
leader
liaison
in the
between.
project. Yes, it's
Yeah.
kind of a liaison. They will also track, how the agile project is kind of moving through the different phases, be it, its initiation, its testing, designing, testing, deployment, etc., right? Um, Besides, the Scrum Master also plays an important role in terms of supporting the development team. If the development team is facing any kind of impediments, right, be it because of the dependency of a particular phase on some other cross-functional teams, they will try to sort out those differences. If the development team needs to have communication with the product owner, they can also facilitate that, right? There is
Right.
often misconception that the development team cannot have any kind of communication with the product owner. They do can have if they're having any kind of confusions related to the product development, but at the same point of time, if they're unable to have that, or if they're unable to track the product owner, if he or she is unavailable, then the Scrum Master can come in between and actually facilitate those kind of conversations. Besides, the Scrum Master also plays a very important role in terms of coaching and mentoring, the development team about the best practices of the methodologies that the Agile team will be following, be it Scrum, be it Kanban, be it other methodologies, right?
Right.
Um, and other than that, the Scrum Master also tries to control the progress of the project and make sure, that the development team as well as the product owners are attending the different Scrum ceremonies that are there within the Scrum umbrella.
Great. Yeah. So we always have this question, right? What exactly our Scrum Master role is, and all about the product owner. So how do both of these roles are different from each other? So certainly, when we talk about product owners' roles, as you mentioned, he is the owner of the product. That means he is the subject matter expert in terms of that product. You know. So is there any possibility? You as a Scrum Master, you can opt for product owner role.
Yes. So one thing, Sunil, in terms of the product owner, um, they can be the subject matter expert of the product. They might be having, the product owner might be having the technical knowledge that they need to have sometimes. Sometimes the subject matter expert can be a different person as well, and this product owner can be only just familiar with the product vision, goals, mission, know the product roadmap, be actually the liaison in between the business stakeholders, the clients, and the development team, right? So yes, if a Scrum Master has got like enough knowledge about the product, and if they want to move into that track, they can definitely be a product owner. They should know how to develop the product, the different kind of principles that goes beneath it. It's a completely whole realm. It's a different subject matter altogether. So I think they should know the technicalities of it. before they are going to transition into a product owner role. But I think today everyone can be everything, right? Once you have enough knowledge about the fundamentals, once you're clear on that, you can slowly transition into those kind of roles.
That's true. That's the great one actually. Yeah, as far as the core skills or the technical knowledge is required, certainly we can go ahead and offload some of the codes or the certification which will help us enabling or bridging that skill gap. Certainly, we can go ahead and apply for that role. Yeah. So on that note, as we are discussing about roles and responsibilities of different agile roles, now there's one question always we have is what is the difference between a product manager or a project manager? So is there any overlap between the responsibilities or it's something completely different? So what's your thought on this?
Yes, I think that's also a very interesting question. Well, it's very suggestive of the name itself. Again, like the product manager is somebody who is managing the development of the product, right? Who is aware of the product mission, vision, goals. It's a role very similar to that of a product owner, right? While the project manager is somewhat different, they are kind of trying to manage a particular project, wherever, in whichever stage it might be, right? And trying to ensure that the objectives of the project, the key performance indicators that are there in the project are met or exceeded, and the stakeholders are satisfied because of the purpose for which the project even started, I would say.
Right. That's great. Yeah. So on while moving forward with our discussion, so we understood about Scrum Master responsibilities versus product owner responsibilities and project manager, how it is different from the product manager, right? So when we talk about development team, it's also one of the another role that we have, you know.
Yes.
So what is their responsibilities? It's apart from the development or executing the work or the activities. What other roles that our development team has?
Yes, so the development team is mainly responsible for developing a particular feature of the project. Let's say, we are going through a sprint, right?
Right.
In this particular sprint, the product owner, the scrum master, and the developer team will be there to actually discuss what are some of the user stories that they will be selecting from the product backlog they have got
Right.
for this particular sprint, based on the sprint objective as well as the client requirements. Now, a product owner might have a vision that, like, well, within this particular sprint, for this mobile app, we can develop feature A, feature B, feature C, right? Um, but sometimes they doesn't have like enough depth of technical knowledge as well as the experience of technical knowledge as developers might have. So the product, it's very essential for the product owners, the scrum masters, as well as the developers to collaborate and have that discussion as to what the user story related to the feature A, what's the kind of effort and the complexity and the risk that we're looking at while developing that particular feature, and whether we will be able to cover that within the sprint. Well, the sprint plans also differ across various organizations. The default sprint plan that we normally look at is around 2 weeks, right? So within that 2 weeks, the developer team has to decide that, well, this feature or this user story that we are selecting for the sprint backlog, whether we will be able to develop it or not. And the product owner has to listen to that, right? And accordingly prioritize their, not only their product backlog, but the developers have to select those items to form the sprint backlog and commit to those items so that they can move forward and develop those things in this current sprint.
Mhm. That's true. So Yeah. So we have, certainly discussed about the roles and responsibility of the major roles that we have, like Scrum Master, the product owner, and the development team. So now let's switch our gears a little bit and go ahead and discuss about something, the Scrum events. When we talk about Scrum, it has its event, it has its artifacts, it has its rules. You know. So would you like to enlighten on something on the events, Scrum events?
Yes. So the Scrum events, we should first understand why the Scrum events or the ceremonies are at all required. So
Mm-hmm.
basically, the Scrum framework is dependent on, the three foundational principles of inspection, adaptation, as well as transparency. And based on these foundational principles, the Scrum ceremonies, which is like the sprint planning, the daily stand-ups, the sprint retrospective, as well as the sprint reviews, are also developed so that we can always inspect, what we are actually developing through this sprint. If there are any kind of impediments that are coming through, what our progress is like, right? What we will be developing today. And as we move forward, we are also transparent with both the product owners, with the other developer team members within this team as to what we are working on, and adapting according to the feedback that we are receiving from the clients. Now, in terms of like, if we want to speak about like each of these Scrum ceremonies, let's say we are speaking about the sprint planning. Well, in this particular phase, the product owner, the Scrum Master, other stakeholders might be present, as well as the development the team will be present to discuss on the items that will be taken from the product backlog and will be taken in this sprint in order to meet the sprint objectives and the goals. For the
Right.
daily stand-ups, it's like kind of 10 to 15-minute call in between the developers, as well as the Scrum Masters might be also present in that call. And basically we discuss as to what we have developed yesterday, what we are trying to develop today, and what are some of the impediments that we have faced in yesterday's development, so that those impediments are removed and we can move along with the progress of the development
Correct.
or with the velocity, right?
Right.
In
Right.
terms of the sprint review, basically the product owner along with the development team, they are presenting in front of the client as to what they have developed throughout this 2 weeks of sprint, and they are having that kind of feedback from the client as to, okay, these are some of the things, you have developed it right, and it kind of meets the acceptance criteria, it has been tested, and then have those kind of feedbacks and incorporate them for the next sprint as well. And the sprint retrospective is more about like an internal discussion in between the development in the Scrum Master as well as a product owner, to see the things that have worked for this development team for this particular sprint, whether everybody stayed motivated, whether there was too much amount of work, whether the team needs more work-life balance, and so on and so forth. Whether the camaraderie in between the development team, the Scrum team, as well as a product owner was okay, or whether some things needs to be improved so that they can deliver effectively the items for the next sprint.
That's great. So when we talk about, it's also a lessons learned discussions, right? What went well, what could have been
Yes.
better
What could
done in
have
a
been
better
better
way.
as well?
Yeah, yeah. So when we talk about this lessons learned and things, what's your thought on this? Is it important to have every week? We can go ahead every week, end of the day, we can go ahead and discuss this one, and or it's is advisable to go ahead on monthly basis or weekly basis. What exactly your thought on this?
So the sprint retrospective, like formally as the Scrum framework discusses it, it should be happening at the very end of the sprint. So let's
Mhm.
say, if the sprint are for 2 weeks, then it should be happening at the end of every 2 week, where we are discussing, well, how this 2 week went, whether it went bad, whether it went good, what are some of the things we need to improve, and so on and so forth, right? And then from the very next day the next sprint begins, and we need to, it's not only about discussion, it's about also incorporating and taking those learnings from the previous sprint and incorporating them or making those necessary changes for the next sprint, so that it's sustainable for the development team and everything gets delivered along according to the plan.
That's true. That's great one. Yeah. So now again, we have other thing called sprint. Sorry, Scrum artifacts. So we have Scrum ceremonies and now Scrum artifacts. So what's your thought on this? How many Scrum artifacts we do have, and what impact it creates on the project?
Yeah, so the Scrum artifacts are mainly those things by which you can keep track of the different things that you are developing. The Scrum artifacts basically provide information to the development team about what you are developing and so on and so forth. It can be in form of just let's say just 1 second, it can be in the form of the product backlog, it can be in the form of sprint backlog, as well as the product increments that we are trying to develop and trying to implement, right? So the product backlog again is it's about like the items that or the features that we have in the backlog based on what we are trying to develop, what the product owner has vision in, what the product owner sees in the product, and what the client wants. The
Right.
sprint backlog again is what we are trying to develop in a particular sprint based on the goals and the objectives of the sprint. And the product increments is like the increment of value, or the smallest unit of work that we are creating, which is shippable and which is observable by the customer, and which can be demonstrated to the customer as well, for them to provide feedback and go on from there. Again, the Scrum artifacts are basically based on the three foundational principles of the Scrum framework, which is inspection, adaptability, and transparency,
And
right?
transparency.
We
Yeah.
are trying to inspect what we are putting in each of the Scrum artifacts, so that everybody is on the same page and everybody is transparent about what we are trying to develop, right? And adaptability, right? As we are developing this product increments, how we are adapting it to the evolving needs of the customer. Because again, agile or the Scrum methodology is mainly used in those cases where the product requirements are very uncertain and it's always evolving, right? As compared to a traditional or waterfall project where the requirements are fixed and we know everything about the requirements, so that we can plan everything ahead.
Right. That's great. Yeah. So now, Scrum, being a Scrum Master, you facilitate the events, the meetings required, right? One important thing is when you are working with the team, you need to understand the do's and don'ts. You know, so how effectively a Scrum Master can go for a Scrum meeting? Let's say the stand-up meeting when we talk about. So what are the do's and don'ts for that? Could you highlight something on that?
Again, a very interesting and important question, I would say. Well, The Scrum framework actually follows a very time boxed approach. Each of the
Right.
Scrum ceremonies, right? The sprint planning, let's say it's time boxed to a maximum of 8 hours. The daily stand up, it's time boxed to a maximum of 10 to 15 minutes, right? So the main thing that the Scrum framework says is that like it should be very quick, and we should be discussing about like what we have worked, what we are working today, and what are some of the problems that we are facing from yesterday. But we should not be going into depth in the daily stand-ups itself as to what our issues are. That might again lengthen the time for the daily stand-up meetings. Rather, what the Scrum framework is suggesting is that, well, once you know these are some of the impediments that your development team is facing, then the Scrum Master can go and have a one-on-one conversation with those members to understand more about those impediments and have them fixed, right? So
Yeah.
it's about time boxing and what we should mainly consider to discuss in the daily stand-ups,
Yeah.
and basically encourage and motivate the development team to only follow these pointers, to have this discussion and have those lengthy discussions parked up for later on.
That's true. So again, setting up the agenda is important for this one, and all the attendees, they must aware of what we are going to discuss. This so, and when we work as a Scrum Master, you always need to foster the open communication environment
Yes.
where people are fear free, and they can, without any hesitation, they can come up and share their feelings. When it's the feelings, all the impediments, the questions. So that's how you build a strong team. You know, so that's a great one. Now, moving ahead, so talking about the challenges. Certainly, you as a Scrum Master, you will be working with people, and you as a facilitator, you need to facilitate everything, like the meetings. In case somebody is facing any impediments, if required to resolve by any third-party team or the vendors or the stakeholders, you know, to facilitate the meeting.
Mhm.
So we may face a lot of challenges in this one, from the communication point of view, from the coordination between the stakeholders or liaison between the stakeholders, or understanding any technicality, or empowering or educating the product owner about the Scrum ceremonies or the Agile principles. You know, so what are some common challenges that you could highlight that a Scrum Master is facing?
Well, some of the common challenges, one thing is mostly with the development team, I would say that they become, so focused on development that sometimes, they don't find the value of the Scrum ceremonies, or, coming to the daily stand-ups and, trying to say what they have developed yesterday and like what they are going to develop today and so on and so forth. But it's the job of the Scrum Master to convince actually the value of the Scrum ceremonies, so that everybody is on the track. Just think, like, if the ceremonies doesn't happen, then the all the development team is not on the same page. They don't know what each other is developing, and sometimes with our focus on development, we might go off track as well, because there are so many things to develop. While through the Scrum ceremonies, we are also trying to control as to what exactly we are trying to develop through the sprint and what we are not developing. So we need to
Right.
discuss, we need to definitely discuss that, so that we can have those deliverables at the end of the sprint, right? Other than that, the other problem that the Scrum Master might face is the product owner sometimes is new and is not as experienced or does not have much knowledge about the Scrum principles. So in those cases, like, it's the Scrum Master's job as well to have that one-on-one connection as well as camaraderie with the product owner, and basically educate them about the different principles of the Scrum framework, so that they can be also a part of the process, and basically gets to participate in it and follow the best practices for the different Scrum principles, right? And lead the development of the product, I would say. And the other thing might be sometimes is the development team also might face some difficulties again while they're trying to estimate the different user stories. The product owner might have like a very different understanding of a particular feature and how they are trying to estimate the work for that particular feature or for that particular user story, while the development team, based on their length of experience as well as the risks or the uncertainties that they have faced from before, might have a deeper like different understanding for that particular user story. And so the estimation part for those user stories, the time, the amount of effort that's required for each of those things may be different in a product owner's mind and in a development team's mind. So the Scrum
Right.
Master again tries to facilitate that and tries to mitigate any kind of conflict that can happen in the process and lead the team towards their goals.
No, that those are very spot on. So these are some of the basic, common challenges that a Scrum Master faces, and also we need to ready to empower team, empower our stakeholder as well as product owner, both internally and externally. So that's one of the critical job being a Scrum Master you have to do, and though you are working with the people closely,
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that's great. As you mentioned something about the sprint, planning or the story point calculation, So something coming to my mind is doing the capacity planning for the team or for each and every sprint. So while you are starting a new sprint, you need to understand what is the strength that you have for the upcoming sprint, or that we say the capacity. So what are the some best practices we have to do that activity, the capacity planning, and what are some of the do's and don'ts, or what techniques you will follow to do that?
Yes. Again, a very interesting question and a very important question to have, really. We need to know what we are exactly trying to develop in this particular sprint and what
Right.
we are trying not to develop. And based on what we are trying to develop, we need to also do a breakdown of the skill set that we will be requiring within our team, for us to deliver that particular increment, right? And accordingly, we should do that capacity planning. Now, based on the availability of the development team again, and we have to also take into consideration the experience of the development team. Some can be
Right.
new developers, some can be experienced developers. So the time that an experienced developer will take to develop a particular user story might be very different from the time a new developer will take to do that same kind of work. In terms of like user story estimation as well as capacity planning as well, right? It's very important to take into consideration some of the important factors like the amount of effort that will be needed to deliver that particular story, the complexity that's involved, in developing that particular story, as well as the risks associated with it. The risks can be in terms of various kind of dependencies, the various kind of bugs that the development team might face while trying to develop a particular user story, right? So all of that needs to be considered while giving or estimating story points for particular user stories. And based on that, based on the breakdown of the skill set that's required for those user stories, that capacity planning should be done so that we can have a strong development team who can basically deliver the increment that we have planned for.
Right. No, that's great. So you are, as like the manager does the capacity planning, they need to understand who and how many resources will be available and what sort of skill set we need to perform any particular task. So
Yes.
that's a crucial aspect as well for a Scrum Master. Now the other one is one thing we learned about capacity. So the other vertical what we have is the velocity.
Mhm.
So the speed of the work. How aggressively team is performing. So what's your thought on this velocity planning, and how Scrum Masters can go ahead and approaching to perform this one?
Again, very interesting question. So when we are starting the sprint, right? What we might do is like the product owner, the scrum master, and the development team might come together to discuss. Okay, like we will be taking on this 4 or 5 user stories, and each of these user stories might be, let's say, having 8 points each, right? So basically we are considering like 8 into 5, like which is 40 user story points to be delivered in this first sprint of 2 weeks. Now let's say with all the things going on, with the bugs that are coming up, and with the dependencies that are also evolving while the development team is trying to develop that particular project, let's say in the first sprint, although we committed to 40 story points, we were not able to complete those 40 story points. We were at 32 story points, right? Now, based on our discussion on the sprint retrospective, we then will be discussing whether we have overestimated our capacity while taking up 40 user story points to complete in this sprint. And based on that, we will try to take up the next sprint and the amount of user stories basically. And over like 2 or 3 sprints, when we know that in each of the sprints, like let's say we have covered 30 in the first, in the second, like we have been able to cover 35 in the in the third sprint, like we have been able to cover like around 40 user story points. Based on this, like we will be able to take an average as to what the velocity of the development team has been across these sprints, right?
Yeah.
And then based on that, we will have an estimate as to what the velocity of the development team is and how we can progress further. And this is
Yeah.
I think like this is best done by also some of the softwares that are present nowadays, like there is Jira. Whenever like you are trying to run an agile project, you will have to give those original estimates in terms of the hours as well as the story points. And once you are done like a first, second, and third sprint for your project, the Jira has got a dashboard which actually shows like what the velocity is going like for your team across the different projects.
That's great. Yeah. So always we have to have the estimation like capacity and velocity in place. So these are again two technicalities that a Scrum Master must understand and know how to perform this one. Yeah. So as you mentioned, one thing, the story point we calculate, for user stories. So would you mind highlighting something on that? What is a user story, and how do we calculate for? No, sorry. What is a story point, and how do we calculate that for a user story?
I think I'll cover like both the three all the three concepts. Like the user story is the foundational unit, or like the smallest unit of development work that
Mhm.
will produce like a shippable increment that can provide value to the customer, right? That's what an user story is. It's the smallest amount of work, and the work cannot be broken down further, because after breaking it down we won't be able to get a shippable deliverable that can be shipped to the customers or can be shown to the customers in order to showcase the value that we have delivered through the sprint, right? So that,
Mhm.
if we are defining the user story like that, uh, then we come to the story points, which is again given or developed in consensus with the development team, the scrum team, as well as a product owner. And there are different methods to do the story point estimating, right? Like the poker planning. You also do the t-shirt sizing based on the
Sizing, yeah.
smallest user story reference, or based on the
Reference to.
smallest user story, you take that as a reference. And then you take the t-shirt sizes, and basically you basically estimate the other user stories that you have in your product backlog or in your sprint backlog as small, medium, large, or Excel, right? And these sizes can be given again based on the risk, the complexity, and the effort that's needed to develop that particular user story, right? So that's how things are done. What was the third thing that you were telling, Sunil, or you were asking? It's a user story and the user story
Yeah,
estimation.
yes. So how do we calculate the story point for any user story?
Yeah, so that's essentially
That's
how we are trying to calculate the story points for the user stories. Now, in terms of Jira, the Jira also wants you to give the original estimate in terms of hours. One question that normally comes up is, can we estimate the user story in terms of hours? Well, again, based on the experience of the development team, right? A developer can take to complete a user story, let's say 5 hours. Another developer can take 10 hours to develop the same amount of work. So it can get really confusing if you are trying to estimate the user story with hours. Rather, it's very important to have a consensus about like the overall complexity and the effort that's needed to develop a user story and have them in the form of story points, I would say.
so again, it's depend on the level of expertise or the experience that one developer has, or the
Yes.
designer has.
Yeah.
It according to that it varies. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great. So I think we are approaching the time. However, I have a few other things to understand here. Now we have something called, the repository, that we say the product backlog, and a smaller repository called sprint backlog. So how do you define both of this product backlog as well as sprint backlog, and how both of these differs or separate from each other?
Yes. So a product backlog can have different items based on the product vision and the product goal. So let's say we are trying to develop a mobile application, right? And we do have different things planned in terms of the feature. Let's say, the shopping cart that we will be including in that mobile app, or we want to include like the different categories of the products that we will be selling through that particular mobile application. So this will be the different features based on the product vision and goal that we have planned on, and all of these features and will be broken down into user stories, and those user stories will be there in the product backlog, right? So it's a culmination of all the features, all the epics, all the user stories that relates to each of the features of the product based on the product vision and the goal. It's a big repository, I would say, the product backlog. But then the sprint backlog is kind of like a prioritized version of the items that we are taking up for a particular sprint based on the objectives and goals of the sprint. So let's say, in terms of the mobile application development project, let's say our goal in the sprint is to develop, certain containers so that we can showcase the different categories of the products that we are selling, right? Or let's say the goal of in this particular sprint is also to develop the shopping cart. So based on those goals, we would prioritize specific user stories and keep them in the sprint backlog, and just request the development team to develop on those features, so that at the end of the day we can show like a version of that mobile app, and show the customer that, hey, you asked for this kind of things and we have developed it, and based on it now you give us a feedback whether we have been able to deliver the value or not.
Correct. So one thing, it's when we summarize, product backlog is nothing but the superset. It's the bigger repository where for
Yes.
each sprint we pull out individual user stories and we try to prioritize and deprioritize. Once we lock that set of user stories for that particular sprint, we call it as a sprint backlog.
Yes.
So
Yes.
yeah, that's great. That's a great one. So I think with this, it wraps up our technical discussion on the project management and the agile part. So I hope our listeners found this insightful and fruitful. So now let's switch our gears a little bit. So we personally believe that understanding a speaker little more about their personal expertise, and also it's equally important to understand them little personal way also. So I have few fun and interesting questions for you. So are we good for that?
Okay, yes, we can have those
Yeah.
questions.
Okay. So let's start with something very light and joyful. That what's your hobby or interest that you have picked up recently? That brings you joy outside of your work.
Yes, so one thing that I have picked up recently is gardening. So I'm very passionate about gardening right now, and I keep on looking at different plants and trying to bring them to my home. Recently, I brought three lavender plantings to my home, and I have planted them. I have been regularly tending them. It's kind of rejuvenates me, I would say, and they're growing right now, and I'm really looking forward to see how they grow, how the lavender flowers comes up. Besides that, I would also say that I enjoy hiking a lot. There are several beautiful parks like over here in Ontario, in the place that I also live in. So during the weekends, I would go into one of those parks and hike. It gives you a good exercise as well. It helps you to breathe fresh oxygen that we need to get refreshed, after the whole amount of work that we do throughout the weeks, right? It's very important to keep yourself rejuvenated and to keep yourself balanced to take on the next week's pressure.
That's great. So that's amazing. So reflecting on the past, if you could give a suggestion to your younger self, what it could be.
Uh, Give a suggestion to my younger self. Um, I would say that keep exploring, right? My younger self has been, I would say, a bit restrictive on the subject area that I used to study. As I developed, I came to understand that each of the concepts that we come across like are somewhere associated with one another, and you really need to explore. You really need to have an open mindset and embrace different kind of changes so that you can grow as the time goes by and as you get like more responsibilities along the way.
Mhm. That's such an insightful, suggestion or the piece of advice. So now, if you could switch your careers for a day, what it could be and why? It's not about again your role like Scrum Master or
Yeah.
project consultant, but yeah, anything that you would like.
um if I would switch my roles, I would perhaps take a role where I'm kind of a travel guide, and I'm traveling to different places, and I'm kind of explaining, different hallmarks of that place to the visitors that are coming in. I would also, take them to different food tours, and also relish the local foods, and have those kind of interactions with people coming from different countries, coming from different backgrounds, and get to know their insights as well and grow myself as a person.
That's great. That's a great one. Now, if you could have any superpower, what it could be and how would you use that?
If I could have a superpower, well, let's see what kind of superpower I want to have. Well, I would say that one of the difficulties that often people in our world faces is related to their access to basic amenities like let's say food, let's say clothing, let's say education. So if I have a superpower, I would make those accesses, available to everyone, so that everyone in our world can have those basic access to food, education, to clothing, and can live towards a better life, can educate themselves, and can grow themselves into a better individual.
That's such an amazing one. So thank you so much for your, insightful, views and your thoughts. So I really appreciate it. And with that note, I think we are good to conclude the show here. So to our audience, I really enjoyed this segment of, this part, and I hope you have enjoyed as well. So with that note, I'd like to conclude. So Sharmila, thank you so much for your time, and I really appreciate it. We really had amazing discussions around project management, agile world, and we delved, deeper dive into the nuances of Scrum roles, events, artifacts, do's and don'ts. It was really amazing discussion. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much, Sunil. The pleasure is mine as well. Listeners, please let us know how you liked the discussion. And if you would like to know any other new things, we can also collaborate another time and have another discussion or speaker series like that. Thank you, everyone. Have a good weekend.
That sounds good. Yeah. Thanks, everyone. See you once again with a new episode. Thanks for your time. Talk to you later again then. Bye now.
Thank you. Bye.